In the last episode, I entered my 10th Canadian province, driving through Yoho and Glacier National Parks, before arriving in the mountain town of Revelstoke. Originally, the plan was simple: continue west towards Kelowna and eventually Vancouver. But while doing a bit of research, I came across an area of British Columbia I hadn't really explored before, the West Kootenays. So instead of staying on the main highway, I decided to take the detour south, into a region known for its deep lakes, rugged mountains, and small character-filled towns. It's a quieter, less traveled corner of British Columbia, but one with a powerful history and some truly beautiful scenery. Car is all packed up and ready to take on the next day. Today I'm going to be driving through the interior of British Columbia. I'm going to be headed southeast from Revelstoke down to a place called the Nikkei Internment Camp. This is where Japanese were interned during World War II. And I'll be headed further south after that to the town of Grand Forks, which sits along the US-Canadian border. And then I'll come back up northwest towards the city of Kelowna, where I'm going to be staying tonight. So I've got a pretty epic drive due through the interior of BC. One I've wanted to do for a long time. It's going to involve a ferry and driving across some very long, beautiful lakes and up along some beautiful mountains as well. Let's take on the next day. Check out the Frontier Motel, or the Tier Motel. Yeah, we're going to head this way. Look at those beautiful flowers. Nice little touch along the highway. All right, let's go get them. Another long day of driving, but I'm really looking forward to this one. Crossing the Columbia River. Made it to Shelters Bay right now, and I'm going to be taking a ferry across to Galena Bay. I'm not sure which body of water I'm crossing, but significant enough that they don't have a bridge. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to expect, but I made it in line, which is good. I had to drive here pretty fast to get here. And we're off. Please feel free to ask it. Alright, let's take a walk around this ferry. Good to stretch the legs and enjoy the view. Proving to be another nice day in BC. Alright, just about crossed over. And this is where we're going to get off. And a long line of cars waiting to get on the ferry to cross the other way. Alright, completely free. No charge. Fantastic. I am in a very free zone in terms of flying my drone. So big part of where I'm driving today, there's no rules or restrictions on drone flights. And I'm going to capture some pretty epic views along the way here. Look how beautiful this is. It's a little mountain stream coming down from the cliff. Is this real life? I think it is, and it's wonderful. So I'm entering now the town of Revelstoke, which is one of the larger towns in this area of BC. It has an airstrip, gas stations, a few other things, but I'm just going to be passing through because I'm headed to the town of New Denver. Throughout this drive, there's going to be these agricultural farming valleys along the way. And we're very far from like the main Trans-Canada Highway area, so a very isolated spot in many ways of British Columbia here, but it is so scenic and so beautiful. Let's take the drone up and get some shots of this valley because, wow, this is something else. Sidewalk seems to be eroding to the dust of time. This is the Nikkei Internment Memorial Centre. And this is one of the sites where Japanese were interned during World War II. An interesting and controversial time in Canadian history. I'm gonna go inside and take a look and then give some of my opinions about the place afterwards. Off the bat, the wood, the architectural style here, it has a very Japanese feel. Here we go. Okay, so there's an admission fee that we'll have to pay. I'll take care of that. So the memorial site here in this garden was built obviously after the internment. A very beautiful and peaceful entry. Of course, they have the Japanese stone garden down here. Large-scale Japanese immigration to Canada began in the late 1800s, with most settlers living in British Columbia, where local communities and businesses were established. By the time of World War II, there were roughly 23,000 people of Japanese origin living in Canada, the majority of them in BC. Approximately 3/4 were Canadian-born. After Japan entered the war in 1941, the Canadian government identified security concerns along the Pacific coast. As a result, people of Japanese origin had their property confiscated, including homes, businesses, and fishing boats. Following initial detention at sites such as Hastings Park in Vancouver, nearly 20,000 people were interned in camps across Canada. But, it does seem they still managed somewhat of a life here, where they had sports events, Boy Scouts, and were able to retain elements of their culture. That's really interesting to see. The facility here is quite small, but actually in the past, when the internment was taking place, it was a much wider area. So when I earlier crossed the bridge, this whole section of town was a larger main site of the internment camp. And So both men and women arrived at these camps like this, and upon their arrival the men would be set off to engage in full-on labor right from the start, and they would be involved in building the facilities here, but also involved in work outside of the camps. In the first home of the interned residents who came here prior to building the wooden facilities that they ended up staying in long term. So here's one of the quite nice. So we have the bedroom here in the corner, the kitchen. So the internment of individuals during World War II and World War I is a very controversial aspect of Canadian history. And it wasn't just the Japanese that were interned. Even during World War I, the Canadian government interned 5,500 Ukrainians, 2,000 Austro-Hungarians, 1,200 Germans, 300 Turks, and 150 Bulgarians. And during World War II, the Canadian government interned 22,000 Japanese, 9,000 Germans, 4,000 communists and fascists, interestingly 2,300 Jews, and 700 Italians. But it's the Japanese who were interned in the greatest number and the greatest concentration, and thus their story has a lot more, is a lot more well known in the mainstream. In 1988, the Canadian government, under Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, formally apologized for the internment of Japanese Canadians during World War II. The apology followed decades of advocacy by survivors and their families, not pressure from the Japanese government. Ottawa stated the internment was driven by racism, not military necessity. Critics argued the decision was based on peacetime values, overlooking the fear, uncertainty, and intelligence limitations of 1942. This includes events like Pearl Harbor, which involved reconnaissance by Japanese operatives in Hawaii. That fear, however, was applied broadly, and many innocent people were swept up in the fog of war. Do you think the Canadian government made the right call? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I hate to say this, the lovely internment center, it is a nice place to walk into. That was an experience. Here is my dinner spot tonight.